Welcome to Handmade Happenings. I'm Marissa, and today it's time to open another new kit. If you missed my last video on this, it was the bobbin lace video. Basically, the explanation is I got a bunch of like beginner kits for some different, I guess you could call it crafts. And I am slowly working my way through trying them. This is the second one, and it is for drop spinning. So I got this kit from Walnut Farms Designs. I think it came from Etsy, though they do have like their own website on the sticker here. And so drop spinning is basically spinning wool roving into yarn, I believe is like the really basic explanation of it. I did try this one time before, but it was a different kit and the directions weren't good, and that was really kind of before the whole idea of just go online and search it and you'll probably find a tutorial was a thing. So I never got far with that. Okay, so this kit comes with the drop spindle. And then two things of, I think it's called, let's see. Yeah, wool roving. So this one is blue and it looks like it has like flecks of pink in it. And then this one here looks like it's just plain blue. And then comes with the papers with all of the explanation and directions. This did come with both written instructions and a link to a video tutorial. So after watching that and reading the instructions, I was ready to start. I'm supposed to hold this with my left hand and spin clockwise with my right hand, which, if I remember correctly, clockwise is right to left, so that way. And stop it, hold it, and let the spinning come up. Oh, okay, I think I see what it's doing. So as I'm moving my finger up, it's the twist that's down here is working its way into the fibers. Okay, so let's try this again. Wrap this back around so that everything's a little tighter. Okay, now that I can feel more tension in it. It's definitely coming out extremely uneven for me. The video that I watched said that pretty much that's to be expected, and that oftentimes once everything is, I guess, plied and then crocheted or knitted or woven or whatever into something, you don't notice it as much. I think something has gone wrong because my twist is untwisting itself out of it, so I don't know, because it's weird because there's spots where it seems like it's maybe twisted too far and spots where it seems like it's not twisting at all. Well, I knew that would happen eventually. I broke the roving, which is apparently okay because it can be put back together, but a little inconvenient. What I'm doing here is what's called the park and draft method, which seems to be the way most beginner drop spindle tutorials teach. And it starts by holding the fiber with one hand and using the other hand to spin the spindle and build up some twist. And then stopping the spindle or parking it to focus on drafting the fiber, which is basically thinning it out by taking your second hand, the one that spun the spindle, and using it to pull up and thin out the fiber, and then pinching the fiber with that second hand and letting go with the first. And then the twist will travel up. And of course, that is just a very basic explanation of what's going on here. Okay, so I have the first ball of roving finished. So let's see, I did most of this yesterday and then I finished off this morning, and it's probably not good. I haven't been able to find really any pictures. It seems nobody, I guess, documents that or something. I don't know. But like, to kind of give me an idea, is this about normal for a beginner spinner or what? So I have nothing to really gauge that on. I do know that every time I felt like I was getting into the rhythm of it is when it would break, and then I would have to kind of undo it to try and reattach it, and then it would just keep breaking further down as it went. So I guess I'm going to have to look up if that's normal, or if I was doing something wrong like the whole way through, or if it's maybe a sign that, like, if maybe it breaking is a sign that there was a problem way further back. I don't know. I do know that the best points in this seem to be, as far as for not breaking, was it would kind of go really thin and then kind of thicker and then thin and thicker, which obviously is not very consistent, but at least it wasn't breaking. Whereas if I would get it kind of consistent, it was usually kind of thin and then it would eventually just snap. So I wound the spun fiber, or what's considered a single, onto a tube of cardstock before starting spinning again. Now, I did look up why the roving was breaking, and as usual, the answer wasn't that simple. As I understand it, underspinning will break because it's not enough twist in the fiber to give it strength to keep it together. And then overspinning will have too much twist and too much tension, also causing it to break. I also learned that uneven drafting is what causes these thick and thin spots, because the twist will settle in the thin spots, causing them to be over twisted, while the thicker sections will be under twisted. So on my second attempt, I tried to focus more on just keeping even drafting, not necessarily really thin. And I don't know that I succeeded, but I didn't have nearly as many breaks, so I consider that an improvement. And when I finished, I rolled the single onto a tube of cardstock just like the first round, and now it's time to ply these together. Okay, so I am ready to start plying the yarn, which is basically just taking my individual parts that I've already spun, which are considered singles, and spinning them together to ply it and create like a 2-ply yarn. So I have my two things, they're actually down here on my cone holders, and I'm just putting them through the loop. And I think the biggest problem is going to be with this is I'm having to spin the opposite way from before, which feels harder because it's a lot harder to me to get the twist going compared to before. All right, so let's see. It is, however, a lot easier on the part of letting the twist go up because I'm not having to thin anything out. It's just letting it kind of go. I did have a few spots where the singles broke, but I just kind of tied them in a knot and kept going. Next, I wound the plied yarn off of the spindle and onto the back of a chair, and I tied it together at different points to keep this loop neat. Then the instructions called for soaking the yarn in cold water to set the twist, but it didn't really say how long to soak it, so I just did it for about 10 minutes before wringing it out and hanging it to dry. So it has dried overnight, and here it is. And the directions for this actually mentioned that a lot of times, and I saw it in a few other places too, that a lot of times things will look a lot better once they've been plied and then when they've actually been used in something. And so far, I do have to say I think it does look a lot better than it did before I applied it, especially in certain spots. It looks like really good and kind of even. There are still, of course, spots that look terrible, but overall I think it looks a lot better. And I think that with the tendency to have like a lot of the chunky yarns that are out now. This kind of fits in with that pretty well. And my one concern is that it might have some weak spots because of course both singles had spots that were either under or over twisted, and I did have one of them at least tear when I was plying the two pieces together. But my hope is that since it's two together, if there's a weak spot in one, hopefully it will be like pretty secure in the other one, and that will keep it from like coming apart when I use it. After letting it dry overnight, I draped the yarn back on the chair and wound it into a ball. I feel like I did almost as much winding and unwinding as I did spinning in this project. This ultimately did not end up making a lot of yarn, which is okay because of course this project was more about learning how to spin than it was ending up with yarn for like a specific project or anything. But I did want to see how it looked when used, so I went ahead and crocheted a sample square. This is just multiple rows of double crochets worked in the back loops, and I just kind of went until I ran out of yarn. I didn't notice any particular difficulties when working with it, though there were some spots where the plying was a little too loose. I didn't have enough twist in it, and it seemed like it would untwist when I pulled stitches through. But the actual finished square looks good. Thick and thin spots aren't obvious at this point, at least to me. It just looks like it was done with a bulky yarn. This was a fun skill to try. There's definitely room for improvement. The biggest piece of advice I saw was just, practice and building muscle memory, which is a little difficult for me just because when I'm practicing on something, I still like to know that I'm going to be able to use whatever it is, even if it's not very good. So like when I learned how to sew, I made a lot of doll clothes, and while they weren't necessarily good clothes, I did have dolls and I was kind of building their wardrobe, so whether the outfit was good or not, it was getting used. With yarn, I don't necessarily use a lot of yarn, so I just don't know what I would do with the amount of practice yarn that I would probably be making. Nevertheless, I do plan to get more roving and keep practicing. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you will join me next week for another handmade happening.